Welcome to the Tech for Founder podcast. I'm your host, Panida, and today we're joined by Dustin, an aspiring polymath renowned for his expertise in AI tools, content repurposing, and polymathic wisdom. In this episode, we'll be diving into these key topics and covering invaluable insights from Dustin that can empower founders in an ever-evolving tech landscape. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Dustin.
Thank you, Panida. As you said, I'm Dustin Polyinnovator, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So can you tell us a bit about your journey, about being an aspiring polymath and your work to becoming an entrepreneurial content creator? And how do you integrate tech tools into your work?
Yeah, for sure. I created my LLC, which is my personal brand, Polyinnovator, as this name for a personal brand online. My online reputation, this business I'm creating as a content creator, I found it to be pretty natural for me. I started blogging back 10 years ago, podcasting around 6 years ago, and making videos around 5. And since then, I've made over 250 videos and 250 podcasts around that point, and over 500 blog posts. Now, what does that have to do with business, right? Ever since I was a young lad, like even around 9 or 10, I wanted to be a businessman. It was just in my blood, it was in my heart, if you will. And making a business out of content is not an easy task. Obviously, you need to have paid products and stuff like that, or memberships. And I'm working on building out my ecosystem of content more and more. But this journey has led me to mess with a whole bunch of different range of tools. One of my sub niches, if you will, is around content repurposing. And I focus on all these amazing tools that have come out because there's hardly been any creators around it. People talk about the tools, but not all new ones.
Definitely. I think there's a lot that is coming right now, especially with AI. And I think it's a great time to be in the field of content creation. And yeah, in that intersection between like knowing how to really use tech and also like having that experience as a content creator prior, I think you're in a great place.
I even took some classes back in high school that taught me graphics design and web design and video editing too. And so once I finally got out and started doing those kind of things, I had that back end. But even when I was 12 or 13, I was messing around with Microsoft Office and using Publisher to create these like magazines and stuff like that. And it was just me being a nerd about these tools. And then once these new tools came out that do it for you, I knew what I needed to look for.
Definitely. I think, yeah, when you've used the old way of doing things and then you see the new ways, it's just like it's so game changing. Like I remember like when I was in high school, I used Photoshop and I was so happy I got the background out. And now you just press one click and it's out, and I'm just like, oh my god. I can't believe I spent like 5-6 hours.
Well, and then on top of that too, like knowing what you need as well, like so you know how good that tool is because you know how much work it was to get it out. It's a little bit easier now in Photoshop. They made it a little bit quicker and whatnot, but using these tools just make it so much like, almost instantaneous, like you're saying.
Definitely. So you mentioned content repurposing as a key focus. Could you share some actionable tips on how non-technical founders can effectively repurpose their content to maximize reach and engagement?
Yes. So obviously with a lot of businesses and entrepreneurs, they're going to have some sort of marketing arm. And inbound marketing or content marketing is one of the bigger options for a lot of people, especially since it is free. You just have to spend time doing it. And the more time you have, the more you can create. And by using tools, you can actually make it, you do way more in a less amount of time. But let's not focus on the tools just yet. Let's say you're just making content. Well, it does stem from where you start. So obviously right now we're doing a podcast. I presume you're recording video to make YouTube as well and put it on Spotify. So you're making 2 different pieces right here. Then you can transcribe it and make it into the third piece into a blog post. You don't want to necessarily just do straight transcription, but you can make some sort of blog post out of this episode. That's great. You have all 3 pillar types. From there, where do you go? Some people are just YouTubers. They just want to make videos. They don't feel comfortable writing. They don't like hearing their own voice, so they don't do podcasting. They just kind of get used to it for video or whatever. And so if you have your video, you can chop that up into clips. You can do things like sharing them on different social media platforms and sharing your insights of that video and making a Facebook or LinkedIn post. Podcasting, you can turn into audiograms, and essentially those are just, audio clips made with a visualizer. And you can even do quote images too on Instagram. There's a lot of things you can do to take your episode or whatever you're creating farther. Blog posts are really nice too, because then you can chop it into quote images, chop it into tweets or threads, whichever one you want to use. And then there's also the option of turning your blog post into a video using other tools like InVideo. There's a lot of ways you can go about it.
Definitely. I think it's very time saving to repurpose one content you've created. And I think one of the guys on LinkedIn, like Justin Welsh, he was talking about how he repurposed most of his content like many times, and people don't remember because you assume that everyone remembers your content, but actually they don't, and you should repurpose.
Well, and here's a distinction I should make. What you're kind of referring to there is more about reposting, if you will, because it is technically repurposing, because you're repurposing that same content by posting it again. You're reposting it, so it's kind of just semantics at that point. But I kind of want to just make that differentiation there, because people who are reposting, they're doing that for a reason. I've seen that go down the wrong path where people are reposting like every day and they're trying to scam the system. Yeah. But then what you're saying there is actually the good way about it, where people are not going to see the stuff you're sharing. And even if they see 10% of what you're posting, for example, I have 500 blog posts. If they're seeing 10%, that's only 50, right? And even then, that's a high percentage. I doubt they're seeing 10% of them. And so by not reposting them, or at least resharing them or something like that, you're kind of doing this disservice to your followers, the people who are subscribed to you or connected with you, because they're not going to see the stuff that might actually help them.
That's true. There's definitely a very clear distinction between repurposing and reposting, definitely. Yeah. And I think both are very valuable and should be used carefully as well, and make sure that you don't make your audience unhappy with posting too many things, and also like having sure that you diversify across platforms and not doing too many, but like just enough.
I want to also just kind of add here, I created this like equation for content creators and really just business people. And I guess this works for business as well. Strategy plus automation times execution. That equals success. And so your strategy, how are you going about it? What are you planning? What is your why behind it? How do you do it to work? And then automation, using tools or maybe scheduling platforms or something like that to make it happen, right? You can't really get too automated, because then you become like a bot and it gets to be too much. If you have too little automation, you're spending way too much time doing meaningless tasks like sharing things on Buffer, for example. And so there's a kind of nuance there. Same with strategy. You don't want to be too much, you don't want to be too little. But if you do that times execution, how hard are you working? That's what's going to equal success.
Definitely, I completely agree with that. I think there needs to be a really clear balance, especially I've actually seen people who over automate, and you can just see that you really feel like you're talking to a robot, and it's not enough, right? Because we're all about personal branding now, and we kind of want to hear the voice of the person who's posting.
Yeah. And I found a new tool recently called Newlink, NUElink.com, and it's one of those things where they have an RSS to social media posting automation. And I've tried so many other platforms, like Zapier, for example, but Zapier constantly broke on me, and other tools. That's the thing about automation tools, they break on you a lot. But Newlink was really cool because they had these alternative captions. All these other tools I came across, none of them had alternative captions. You had just the same caption for every post. So, hey, you want to share this episode on Twitter, let's say you want to share your Spotify link. Anytime the new RSS feed gets added, it shares a tweet. But it would be like, okay, here's the new Tech for Founders podcast episode. And it's the same caption every single time. It is obvious that it's automation. But if you were to tweak it a little bit, like, hey, I just released a new episode of the Tech for Founders podcast, check it out, and then change it up each time. It's really nice.
Definitely. So automate and then tweak it towards your own strategy.
Yeah.
So AI has been a hot topic. What are some AI tools or trends that you've explored recently that can benefit tech-focused entrepreneurs?
Obviously, the idea of generation comes to mind, because all these tools like ChatGPT, DALL-E, Midjourney, Blue Willow, like all these different tools that have come out, Runway ML, for example, too, allow you to make, text, video, even audio at some points too. Leveraging this new tech is not an easy thing. Obviously, you have to learn the tools too. I keep saying obviously, but obviously you have to learn something in order to play with it and do more with it. I find that there's a lot of learning curve to a lot of them. Just like if you were to pick up Photoshop, for example, we were talking about how these different skills earlier, it took you like 6 hours to remove a background. Once you get better at it takes maybe an hour and then 30 minutes, that kind of thing. When you're using text generation tools, it's the same deal. You have to learn how to use these tools. And while some of them make them simpler than others, like if I want to make clips out of this episode or out of my podcast, I'll use something like Opus.pro to make these clips. And it makes it a lot simpler. I've had access to a lot of AI tools in the past. I bought lifetime access to Chapcast, for example, to make clips. It still had way too many steps to get it done. I knew what I wanted from video editing experiences, right? And this tool made it a lot easier to actually make the clips, but it still had too many steps. I had to wait till Opus came out where the steps became less and less and easier. And that's because I just didn't have the time or the bandwidth to do that for every single episode. And that's the example I was trying to use, just to kind of say, even with all these new tools, the important lesson is how much time you're able to spend to learn it.
Definitely. I think that's a very important point because I think a lot of people assume that, hey, it's AI, right? Like we don't really need to learn. We just we put it in, it just comes out, everything just works, and then we'll just post it somewhere. But obviously you have to learn how it works and how to do it properly because there is a way to talk to these AIs as well. And that's the whole thing with prompt engineering. And the people who know how to talk to the AI, they will have way cooler stuff than the people who don't.
Yeah. And I don't want to go too much on a tangent here, but at the beginning of the year, I was playing around with ChatGPT a lot because I finally got around to actually getting to it. So at the very tail end of December and beginning of January, I was using it every day and trying out, like asking things about polymathy, asking it things about AI, and just going through these different threads on ChatGPT. And at one point, I like video games. I like Pokemon in particular. I had a whole bunch of ideas for making my own Pokemon game, if you will. And ChatGPT was able to flesh out those ideas so much that I was able to start coming up with an idea for a video game. It's awesome. Fleshing out the plot and the story and whatever. The point is, I could no longer ignore this new opportunity that showed up because, hey, ChatGPT was helping me create something that was new. And then I started exploring other tools, text generation tools for images, right? Or even text to video now. And all these image tools came out, and at the same time too, DALL-E was getting more and more popular at that moment. And I was able to come up with these beta designs for different creatures or people and that kind of thing. So I was able to start doing the early process of game development just using these tools. And that example could be applied to many other fields too, but it's just fascinating how drastic of a change that was.
Absolutely. I think it's the point in which you can get from idea to product is a lot faster now with these tools. And I think people need to understand how serious that is and what that means to getting something out there.
Yeah, like if you wanted to make a micro SaaS, for example, there's a lot of these tools that have come out with Figma. I don't know if they're Figma plugins, but they'll basically take your Figma designs and make it into a website or even make it into a web app. I'm not sure how good they are just yet, but the fact that they're there and you could try it out, that is interesting. And they're just only going to get better too.
Definitely. So many founders struggle with information overload. How do you use tools like Notion, Obsidian, or Capacities.io for personal knowledge management? And how can this help founders in their decision-making process?
Yeah, well, and you mentioned 3 tools there because that's what I had mentioned to you. And just to answer the question, like that's 3 different choices right there. We're trying to talk about using knowledge management to make it easier for people, but then we're giving them 3 choices that then have to spend energy to do. So just to make it simpler, a lot of people might want to use Obsidian because it's local, it's more secure because it's on your computer. Great. People might want to use Notion because it's better for teams to make wikis and stuff like that. I started out in Notion and created an extensive life operating system to manage my life. I then transferred that to other tools. Now I personally use Capacities because it's just simpler for personal use. But again, entrepreneurs listening in might have a team. They may want Notion for that reason. So if that helps you with their decision-making process, that'd be great. The point being, these tools basically dump what's in your head onto something else. Using a physical journal is great, but this is limited on what you can do whenever you are trying to actually come up with ideas and do something about them. Obsidian's really cool because it connects different ideas together, allowing you to create this network of ideas. Idea emergence, as they call it. Notion and Capacities can technically do that too, in a way, but not nearly as well. But my point is, idea emergence happens when there's a synergy of 2 ideas, something that could be completely disparate. That leads into polymathy too, actually. But this idea emergence allows entrepreneurs to come up with new plans for the future and execute on those plans.
Definitely. I think one of the things you mentioned is that, well, these are 3 tools and we should really pick one and dive into that, and then choosing the one that works best for your business, especially if it's Teams, it should be Notion, etc. And like, I like the idea of what you said about having 2 ideas like become like something that's very useful for entrepreneurs, because I think it's actually quite interesting, because especially with like the interdisciplinarity of like the world that we're going into now, and like how important it is to like merge 2 different fields of ideas together, and how that can generate some really interesting products.
Yeah, I mean, look at what you're doing right now. You're using content creation skills, but also business knowledge that you're doing to create something new, to creating this Tech for Founders podcast, right? And what's interesting about idea synergy is that humans are naturally more generalists than they are specialists. We need specialists in society, and there's always been specialists, but there's always been generalists as well. One of the reasons why I go on shows like this, and just I've been on around 70 shows at this point. One of the main reasons why I do it is to share the idea that being multidisciplinary is not only good for us, it's natural for us too. There's always that broken phrase, a jack of all trades, master of none. That's only half of it, but oftentimes better than the master of one, is what it continues to be. And so with the broken phrase, it seems, and out of context, negative. Oh, jack of all trades, master of none. You do too many things, you're no longer good at any of them. But that's not necessarily true, because you could be a jack of all trades and still be an expert in the field. It's called a T-shaped person, right? A T-shaped marketer, for example. And by having the second part of that phrase in there too, oftentimes better than a master of one, allows for this idea that, okay, by having this wide range, I can do many different things. Entrepreneurs wear many hats. They have to in order to actually get the business off the ground. By doing many different things, you can come up with new ideas and start innovating even more.
Definitely. I completely agree with that. And I love that you're here on my show and sharing your experience with interdisciplinarity is actually something I personally love as well. And when I found out about you, I was like, whoa, this is so cool. Like, there's this like polymath thing going on. Like, I didn't know that. If I knew that, I probably would have gone down that path, but I didn't know at that time.
I mean, you're still plenty young enough to take that path. I feel like a lot of polymaths actually come about by just doing one thing at a time, too. So there's a serialized approach where you do one thing for 1 to 10 years, do another one for the next 10 years, and so forth. And by the end of your life, you're a polymath. I took a more juggling approach where I like spinning many different plates, and that's what I've always done. But both approaches are natural, right? Most people are actually pretty much polymathic because they might be a specialist in one thing, and they'll do that field for 10, 15, 20 years. But guess what? Let's say you start working at 18, you do it for 20 years, you're only, 38 at that point? Math. But you're only 38, you still have a whole life ahead of you, and you could have multiple careers after that. And then on top of that, if you take the juggling approach, you can build it up.
Definitely. You can definitely do that, like 20 years in one field and the next in another field. And I'm sure you'll be contributing a lot to the second field as well.
You bring all that knowledge from the first one into it.
Definitely. So given your extensive experience in content creation, how can non-technical founders measure and maximize their return on investment for their content efforts, especially when it comes to repurposing content and utilizing AI tools effectively?
Well, in one area that I've been weak at is like analytics, for example. I know how to look at analytics. I know a lot of different tools that are out there, but I don't personally spend too much time on that. When you're first starting as a creator, and even if you're an entrepreneur and you're a business owner, right? And you're starting to make content, you are starting to be a creator. You have to start from zero. And I think a lot of owners have that hard time with that perception. Like, hey, I'm a business person. I've been in business for X amount of years. I know what I'm doing. But when you start doing content creation, you have to have that beginner's mind. You're now learning and becoming something new too. And a lot of creators need to gain that experience first. And so in order to get better ROI, you have to do enough reps. So just like in the gym, you have to do enough reps to get the muscles built up. Same with content. Usually a lot of the big creators say around 100 posts. So let's say 100 videos, 100 blog posts, or some combination of the two. Pillar posts, not just like tweets and stuff like that. They get 100 posts to get experience in being a creator, seeing what it feels like, getting used to your own voice, seeing yourself on camera, using skills to like look at the camera when you're talking to it. These are all things you learn by just doing it enough times. When I became a host on the podcast that I host, it took me a number of reps to actually feel comfortable being that host. I kind of knew going in what skills I needed to know, and I worked on that. I feel like I was probably more prepared than most people are when it comes to hosting people on the show. I'd already been podcasting for 3 years prior anyways, but I still had to put in the reps and learn things. Like after 5 episodes, I was like, I need to tweak this, that kind of thing. I had one person on the show who didn't like my Calendly, for example. There was too many questions on there, and he called it administrative trivia. That's good feedback. I could not have known that until I put in the reps, right? And so with content creation, you have to put in the time, you have to put in the reps. Once you do, you'll start seeing the ROI. You'll start seeing more traffic to your website. You'll start seeing more conversions, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about how you have to put in the reps, and also the fact that even if you're like the most established businessman, when you're starting social media, you're definitely starting from 0 followers. And I think there's a certain amount of humility that you need to join social media, and that the amount of confidence that you need to post about yourself on social media. Yeah, and doing that repeatedly every week, and then you start seeing results, like you said.
Well, and think about it this way too. Like you have done 20, 30 episodes so far, it seems like, and you're getting better and better each time. You're looking at me or at the camera, one of the two. You're using hand gestures. As a host, you're being expressive. You have good voice. You're even replying back to an idea that I shared in my answer. So those are things that people learn when they first start hosting. But maybe one thing you can do to improve is just, for example, look at the camera more when you're reading notes, right? Or something like that. That's something I have a really hard time with. I have my notes off to the side, so that way I can try to be as close to the camera as possible, but I still look away from the camera. So people have commented on my videos like, hey, you're looking away. And I'm like, I have to. But doing it less and less is, that's what I'm saying.
Definitely. I think, incremental improvements with every rep is very important. So you have experience with omni-channel marketing. What are some key strategies and technologies that founders should consider when developing their marketing plans?
Great question, Panida. And I think that when it comes to omni-channel, it's again going down to those reps. I only am able to do it because I know each channel, right? So by doing 100 reps in videos, well, then you could go to YouTube or wherever you post your videos. By doing 100 reps of blog posts, wherever that may be on your website or Medium or whatever, you're getting used to that platform. You're getting used to WordPress, or in my case, I use GoCMS, for example, for my blog. And by putting the reps there, you understand that pillar type way more than you do the other pillar types. Maybe you start a podcast, maybe you start a YouTube channel after being a blogger. And by doing 100 reps in each area, then you get a really good holistic view of what it means to be a content creator. But we talked about disseminating that big piece of content into micro content earlier. And that's how the omnichannel kind of happens. You have to have these arms like a tentacles. That's why I call it my content ecosystem rather than just my content creation, right? Because it's an ecosystem of content. You have your pillar pieces and your pillar places you're mainly focused on. But then you have to go maybe learn how to use Twitter. Like maybe you don't know how to use it at all. Make 100 tweets. After 100 tweets, you're going to know how to use it a lot more. Same with Threads, same with Instagram and TikTok. I've talked to people who are content creators. They've been a content creator for a long while. They make YouTube shorts. They've made Instagram posts, but they don't understand TikTok. And it's funny to me because it's pretty much the same, but I get it because they just haven't put in those reps on those platforms. Once you do that, you can add it to your system, and it's like an octopus. It's adding more arms, if you will, and you're just extending out farther and farther.
I love that. I think that's really good advice because I think some people, they get stuck on one platform and they do really well. Like I've actually had friends who like have like 10K on Instagram and they're trying to break into YouTube and they're like, how do I get started? I'm pretty sure the answer, like what you say, is like post 100 videos. And I think that's how you learn YouTube.
Sure, you can always take traffic from your main place like Instagram, but it's not going to convert that well. And Instagram at least is somewhat better about that because of stories and the other options you can do to share stuff. But I've met so many TikTokers because I've been on TikTok since it was Musical.ly, right? Back in 2018 or something like that. I've seen so many TikTokers blow up, have millions of followers, and yet they have maybe 2,000 YouTube subscribers, which is a lot compared to what I have, right? But considering how much they have on TikTok, that is insane how low that conversion is. And so bringing someone from one platform to the other, this isn't really going to work. That's why Twitch doesn't work for a lot of streamers, for example. People join up on Twitch, they might even stream every day for 2 or 3 hours, but they get no growth on there because there's no discoverability on that platform. The only way people get growth is by pulling in from YouTube and TikTok into their Twitch stream, for example.
Definitely. I think that's very good advice. Like knowing where you're going to get people to watch your videos from, especially if there's more discoverability in those channels, and just like making sure that you're choosing the right platforms for your type of content as well. Yeah. Would you say that there's like, sorry, go first.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, TikTok and YouTube have great discoverability, but they don't always convert to going to other platforms, and both of them do not want you to leave their platform. So it's one of those things that's kind of like...
Definitely. So you mentioned self-development through the 4 pillars philosophy. Could you explain this philosophy and how it can aid founders in balancing their personal and professional lives?
Yeah, I mentioned that to you over email, but we hadn't really mentioned it in the episode, just for clarification for anyone listening in. The 4 pillars is something I created in order to organize the 4 major aspects of life. And it's based off of more ancient philosophies, but I just try to modernize it for, entrepreneurs and people like us, where you have the mind, body, spirit, and emotions. And each one is important and integral to our lives. And just like with our pillar content, for example, I feel like each person has their own pillar that is their main one, if you will. Growing up, I was scrawny and weak. I got teased, I got bullied, and in that kind of mindset, I felt weak and diminished. And so when I became a teenager and a little bit older, I started taking swimming. I started working at a recreation center as a lifeguard and then teaching swimming too. And I worked as a fitness person, started teaching fitness classes, then eventually became a personal trainer. And over that course of the last 11 years, I became a much more physically oriented person and gained my strength. And so the body pillar became my main anchor. That's the pillar that I anchored down to. I view the other pillars through that lens. And that's kind of a bias, I will say, but by having that anchor pillar, then I could build up the other ones as well. The body and mind connection is very strong. When you start taking care of your body, your mind gets a little bit more clear, a little bit sharper. By taking care of the mind and vice versa, you start focusing more on the body, and it does the opposite as well. Spirituality gets a little bit more finicky because of religion and different philosophies out there, but really I see it as a bridge between the conscious and subconscious mind and kind of keep that bridge strong. And then emotional regulation and understanding is key too. So each pillar has its point in life. And as an entrepreneur, you have to manage your emotions. I worked for an entrepreneur in an escape room place. Actually, it's like really fun. But the entrepreneur was not very in control of his emotions. He'd snap like that on the smallest things. He wasn't aware of his emotions, and he wasn't aware that he was making those changes. And he's lost many people over the years because of that, right? And then there's also mental and physical. If you don't take care of yourself, don't take care of your mind, you won't be able to run your business very well.
Definitely. I think the mind, body, and spiritual connection is very important. And I think these pillars are essential. I think a lot of people think that, hey, let's just focus on the business part. Let's just improve our business. But I think over time, when you start to burn out and you get to that point where like, hey, like I can't take it anymore, you're going to need to start taking care of yourself, because otherwise no one can work on your business if you're not well.
Yeah, you got to take care of yourself. And in order to put in the reps, like we talked about earlier, you have to take care of yourself. If you don't have energy, you can't put in the reps. I was sick over the course of September this year. Just out of nowhere, I got pneumonia, Legionella-based pneumonia too, no less. So it hit me hard. The sickest I've been in my life. And I'm not trying to look for any like attention or something like that. But what I'm saying is that I woke up some days with 50% energy. That was an external stimuli that I could not change. I did my best to take medicine and get better, but my health was at risk. And so my body pillar and even my mental clarity was diminished, and I had no control over that. And so I couldn't really work on content. I'd be lucky if I got at least one thing done every day, if that. I woke up at 50% energy some days, and you don't know what's going to hit you. The pandemic hit everybody, and people who were able to adapt thrived. People who didn't, they weren't able to keep their mind sane from being stuck at home for so long. They weren't able to keep their bodies going because they're stuck at home. They're not at the gym like they might normally be. They relied on that gym as an anchor for exercise when you could exercise at home or outside, right? Being able to adapt and understand that.
Definitely. I'm happy you are back and well right now. And also, with the health thing, it's so important. And also adaptability. that you mentioned, because we all need to adapt, because otherwise that we won't ever make the time to exercise, especially if we can't like go to the gym. We should at least do some video on YouTube rather than expecting that, hey, like I didn't go here today, I won't go this week, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and just for your listeners one thing I teach a lot of my clients, it's one of the first things I do, is the trifecta: push-ups, pull-ups, and squats. A lot of people can't do a proper squat, for example, or they can't even do pull-ups because they don't have the arm strength yet. That's fine. There's ways of adapting it to make it easier. Same with push-ups. Some people can't do push-ups because they don't have the shoulders or arm strength for it. That's completely fine. Do it against a kitchen counter or something like that. Do a pull-up on a bar that's low enough where your feet can stay on the ground. You can adapt it to what you need. Do a squat with your hands holding onto a bar or something like that. You can adapt it. It's a basic system that'll work out most of your muscles. You could do that at home.
Definitely, I love that. So, given your multifaceted background, what advice or guiding principles do you have for non-technical founders looking to harness technology's power for their ventures, especially in today's rapidly evolving tech landscape?
Well, that's a loaded question there. I think it's a definitely fitting one considering all the different things we talked about today too. I've always taken a multifaceted approach because that's my natural inclination, and I think it is for a lot of people, but not everyone. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that inclination just because that's why they do it. They can't stand to be in a corporate job. They can't really stay with that boring kind of same old kind of life. Hence why they became entrepreneurs in the first place, and why they'll probably be the first ones to use AI tools and different systems out there to help you accelerate. By being adaptable, by being kind of entrepreneurial, you're able to see these changes quicker than other people, and you're able to do something about it quicker. If you look at the bell curve, you have the early adopters and the late adopters. But in the middle, you have some of the more kind of like, okay, you have early, but not as early. You have late, but not as late. And entrepreneurs fit somewhere in the beginning two pieces. They might be bleeding edge, but they might just be early adopters and say, hey, there's this new tool that came out. It's been proven a little bit. I'm going to join up and start using it. And entrepreneurs are going to see that tool first because they're keeping this eye and mind open. They're taking that multifaceted approach. They're not going to be like, hey, I'm a specialist. I'm only going to look at my one narrow field. They're going to look at multiple. Even if they're not an expert in it, they'll see, okay, I can learn that. I can adapt to that.
Definitely. I really like what you said about being early adopters. I think that's especially incredibly valuable, especially with today's rapidly moving technology. And you kind of need to see the trend coming before it comes, or maybe just like at the edge, like what you said, with being an early adopter and a like medium kind of early adopter.
Just being first if you can.
Once everyone starts using it, it won't be so special.
I mean, that's what happened with me with TikTok. I didn't use it nearly enough, and now I'm still trying to struggle to grow. I mean, it's my biggest platform. I have 3,300 people on there, which is a lot compared to all my other stuff, but small compared to what other TikTokers have. And I've been on there for 6 years at this point, around that point, between those 2 years. And yet I should be bigger when I'm at than where I am right now, but I'm not. And it's because I didn't put enough effort in earlier on. For the last 4 years, I've kind of had my thought to myself, I should be posting 5 to 10 times a day. And I wasn't doing it. And now that it's past that early adopter stage, yes, 5 to 10 times a day is good. And in fact, I think a lot of people should still do that. It's no longer as effective as it once was.
Definitely. So I think that's a great closing point, to try new things and be an early adopter in this rapidly moving world. So thank you so much, Dustin, for sharing all your expertise with us today.
Thank you for having me, and just taking that polymathic approach and understanding that it starts with curiosity.